I think that the most interesting thing now is that we understand when you look at the gut and the cells that line the gut that they are the largest immune organ of the body, and that in fact the gut kind of rules everything. And to me, and that I mean, it's interesting. I was a gut or a bug guy. I mean, that's what I was trained to do, and and I certainly have a background in immunology, but it was always kind of aimed at what was the bug doing to the host, rather than saying, okay, how's the host responding, and maybe how's the host responding inappropriately.
So welcome everybody to this episode of the Dairy Podcast Show. I am your host for today, Gail Carpenter. I am the State Dairy Extension Specialist at Iowa State University. And I am joined by Dr. Chris Chase from the South Dakota State University School of Vet Med. Chris Chase is a professor of veterinary and biomedical science at South Dakota State in Brookings. He received his DVM from Iowa State in 1980. His master's in 1987 and PhD in 1990, University of Wisconsin-Madison. He was an associate at the Viborg Is that how you say it? Viborg?
Viborg, yeah.
It must be Norwegian.
Danish.
Danish. Oh, okay.
Anything about horse anatomy, there's Viborg's Triangle, which is the place where you make approach for a guttural pouch is called Viborg's Triangle. So yeah.
Oh, all right. So was that a Danish guy
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Okay. All right.
And his name is Viborg, I imagine. So yeah.
Okay. No related to the vet clinic though. I assume.
No.
And he continued his active involvement in clinical vet med for 25 years. He has clinical experience with dairy, cow-calf, feedlot, hog herd health. He's taught virology and immunology to undergraduate and graduate students for the past 30 years, and agents of infectious disease to professional vet students for the past 3 years at SDSU. And is an emeritus professor. We were just talking about that before we started recording today. He's the past president of the South Dakota State Vet Med Association, the American Association of Veterinary Immunologists. He's past chairs of the AVMA Council of Biologics and Therapeutic Agents, Conference on Workers and Animal Diseases, and the American College of Veterinary Microbiologists. He was the South Dakota Veterinarian of the Year in 2009, received the F.O. Butler Excellence in Research Award in 2010, and the Outstanding Leadership in Undergraduate Research in 2011 from SDSU. He received the 2022 SDVMA Distinguished Service Award and the 2024 AAVI Distinguished Immunologist Award, and was selected as a 2024 fellow, the Conference on Workers and Animal Disease. Okay, that was a mouthful.
Yeah.
Give me a sec to catch my breath after that. And today we are talking about gut health and the importance of gut health. So, Dr. Chase, why should I care about gut health?
Well, I think that the most interesting thing now is that we understand when you look at the gut and the cells that line the gut that they are the largest immune organ of the body, and that in fact the gut kind of rules everything. And so to me, and that I mean, it's interesting. I was a gut or a bug guy. I mean, that's what I was trained to do, and and I certainly have a background in immunology, but it was always kind of aimed at what was the bug doing to the host, rather than saying, okay, how's the host responding, and maybe how's the host responding inappropriately. And I think that's what's pretty clear now is that how integrated the microbiome is. And again, although we're talking about the gut today, we certainly know that's also true in the respiratory tract as well. Is that the microbiome's interaction with epithelial cells is huge. But the thing about the gut is one of the things we don't have to worry about in the respiratory tract is I guess we need to make sure we have intake of oxygen. That's sort of important. But when you look at the gut with how much variation there is in terms of intakes that we have, or quality of water that we have, there's just a lot of things that are in flux that really, and then let alone the stressors then that the animal undergoes that affect the immune response. And so, but the idea that there's this interaction continually going on, homeostasis between really the gut epithelial cells, the microbiome, and the environment, to me is, and now our understanding that in fact gut motility is all about immune function, and how the gut epithelial cells are interacting, how the macrophages are interacting, and that's even peristalsis is dependent on that. So, and you know, and I think the certainly one of the issues that we've been dealing with in the dairy industry and veterinary medicine is this whole high path avian influenza issue. But if you look at what the symptoms are, I mean, they're really about there's an inflammatory response that the udder is sending to the gut, and I think that's it. That's the other thing that I think that we never really thought much about was how inflammation isn't just in one compartment. Whether we're talking about mastitis or we're talking about pneumonia or we're talking about GI or if we're talking about reproductive, that these systems are all interacting. But in particular, the gut is really sensitive, and both in terms of turning systemic inflammation on, but also in terms of how responsive it is to other inflammatory responses elsewhere in the cow's body.
Natural Biologics is using cutting-edge science to deliver cost-effective solutions for the animal health and productivity challenges you face. For conventional or organic production systems, Natural Biologics can help support rumen health and immune function, mitigate pathogens, and increase production efficiency. Visit naturalbiologics.com to learn more.
So when we're talking about gut today, just to set the stage, are we talking about the rumen? Are we talking about the small intestine? Where are we focusing on that whole? There's esophagus to rectum. Where are we focusing our time?
Mostly that we're going to be talking about is probably lower small intestine, ileum, and then probably certainly into the cecum and that part of the large intestine. But I would say to you that as far as I'm concerned, lots of paradigms that we had about the rumen.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I don't think we can say very much. I mean, I think whether when we talk about acidosis and we talk about we're talking about fat cow now, but with liver abscesses, that was all about subacute rumen acidosis, and that all had to do with the rumen. And I would contend that the one cell depth in the ileum is a heck of a lot easier to get across than it is in the rumen. So I mean, I think the hindgut to me is kind of right now kind of one of the bigger great unknowns as we look at rumen immunology and rumen inflammatory responses, because I think but then on the flip side, we don't know that much about the rumen.
Right.
I think
that's true. Yeah, it does feel like we spent a lot of time trying to figure the rumen out, and the rumen's always been this kind of black box,
yeah.
right? And we were like, oh, but the small intestine's easy. But it does feel like over the past few years that there's been a shift, and people are realizing like, oh, there's actually like a lot more going on down here than we ever. It's not just for absorbing nutrients, right? It is,
Yeah.
like you said, there's a lot of host microbe communication going on there.
And what's driven that? I mean, it's like a lot of things. Rodent research drives things. Let's face it, because you can do lots of things in rodents that then we can scale up for when we're looking at ruminants. And so I mean, so a lot of the work that was done, like particularly it was done in rats and some other things, really looked at the ileum and in the cecum. But I mean, it's clear because we've always known. I mean, if you look at where's the immune tissue in the intestinal tract, well, I mean, the ileum that's where the home run is. I mean, it's most of the when you look at Peyer's patches and the kind of the big aggregates of immune cells, it's in that part. So it shouldn't be sort of that earth shattering to us that in fact the lower gut is really. But I think the hindgut thing to me is really fascinating in terms of I think that's it's turned our attention from way before. Like I said, it was all about it's way upstream, and now we're saying no, maybe it's a lot of it's downstream, or guess what? It's both streams. I think that's probably the biggest thing.
Yeah. Does that change how we feed cows though? Whether it's hindgut or foregut, how does that impact? Yeah.
To me, that's a really good question, though. I mean, because we've talked about bypass and and free starch and all that stuff, and I'm not a nutritionist. I'll be the first to admit that. Often veterinarians are accused, what's the difference between God and a veterinarian? God doesn't think he's a nutritionist, but
yeah,
I'm a veterinarian that knows that how important nutrition is, and certainly, but in terms of what the question you just asked is real. I mean, it's really, because I think we've fed figuring that the rumen was really, so that we're talking about what can get digested, or if we're talking about how we deal with bypass, mean, it really was all about, what can we do in terms of sort of rumen flow. And yeah, and I think it's a really good question, because I think, I mean, as clearly we know, I was asked last in April, so a month and a half ago, to give a talk in Brazil, uh, to a cattle group, and it was a talk about, nutraceuticals and all those things. And I said, well, as far as I'm concerned, the two key nutraceuticals are water and fiber. Okay, I don't think
Mm,
we can ever get past those. We better, because if you don't have those two under control,
yeah.
you get, it doesn't really matter what you have. And I think, and so back to what we're just, talking about now. How does it change how we feed cows? I think is well, time's going to tell, but I think we will see things that will change the paradigm. I think, the I mean, paradigms are interesting, and I'm a huge Lance Baumgart fan, and I've watched the things that Lance has looked at. And he and I've been fortunate two or three times that he and I have been together actually for extended periods of time, so
Yeah.
we've gotten to experience the entire Lance Baumgart experience. And but how he thinks is really. I mean, I think that changes how you think about cows. I mean, in terms of not just about heat stress, but just in terms of how we feed cows. So I think the answer to that question is stay tuned.
Well, and I think that that's so true that we tend to kind of isolate ourselves within our disciplines, right? Like, I'm a nutritionist, you're an immunologist, so and so is a reprophysiologist, and it seems like we've had a lot more understanding as an industry that none of us really works on its own, because the cow is a system and she's embedded in a system, which is the dairy farm. So you can't, like, I can spend all my time thinking about the best nutrient profile to give to a cow, right, and the best diet, but if my management isn't right, I can't outfeed that, right? So we have to think about how we fit in, how that cow fits in with the system as a whole. And I think we're really starting to realize that it's not just about requirements, right? And I think, as we're talking about this whole idea of gut health, that's another thing in there too. You can't, you know, there's nutraceuticals, I'm sure, that are effective, but also I think we also have to be thinking about limiting overstocking, making sure that animals are getting bedded comfortably, cow comfort, animal welfare, water quality, all of these things that were kind of, maybe not water quality, but a lot of things we kind of lumped into the soft sciences. I think we're starting to realize that those actually have a bigger impact on some of these more quantifiable outcomes, than we always thought. So I think gut health's probably just another example of systems that interact with each other.
And I think, the other thing certainly, and as we look at, because you just talked about NRC requirements, but NRC requirements, really look at, in terms of the animals. Obviously, you integrate everything together, but I think about, so what is that microbiome? I
Mm,
mean, it's a big consumer, and we know that, in fact, if you're looking at transition cows, or you're looking at anything where intakes go down, that's a big issue. And then the very fact that microbiome is producing, uh, you know, certainly a number of either direct components of the microbiome, in other words, pieces of the microbiome or of the cell wall or whatever, or the metabolites.
mm,
And so, and again, and that's where the whole, when we look at nutraceuticals and those things, I mean, they have a place, and I believe that. Absolutely believe they have a place. Of the key ends up being, trying to be strategic about it and understand that there's not a silver bullet. That
mhm,
indeed, typically what we're going to look at, and I think we've seen that in the industry where people are integrating, different things at different times. But if you don't have, it's like what I say, if you don't have the fiber and the water on the front end, it
right.
doesn't matter. I mean, and so all the things that you just mentioned in terms of management are huge, because the thing that, again, this is an interaction between the gut and the immune system, and that system is in such a delicate balance that being able to just, you know and the thing about it is that it needs to be, I mean, where the gut wants to be is, it wants to be anti-inflammatory, because it doesn't
Mhm,
want to react to everything that's going on. It doesn't want to be leaky, and in spite of that, and then you have two sides working that. So the immune system, if I have systemic inflammation somewhere else, is that going to have an effect, on the cells or on the macrophages that are there? So now, I decrease peristalsis, and I end up with gut stasis, which is, or rumen stasis, which I'm not at, certainly don't want to deal with. But the immune system is just affected by so many different kinds of stressors that, so all the things you talked about. So in terms of density and those things, the condition of an environment. I mean, heat stress. I mean, Lance has done a ton of work at that, and then and then the quality of forage, and as we've seen the use of a lot of byproducts and those things, that all that changes, and I understand all that, because in the end, the whole point here is to make a profit. Okay, but at the same time,
Hmm.
making sure that we have the best animal welfare and the best animal well-being as well, because that animal that's happy is going to be an animal that's going to produce well. And it really, and like I said, it begins at the gut, though. That gut,
Yep.
and so again, so what we're seeing again, if I go back to the high path, whatever that inflammatory response is, then having a negative effect then on intakes and but it's affecting the gut, and it's just amazing, you know. And we learned that from COVID. I mean, what we learned, we learned that COVID in terms of how inflammation in one area has an effect on the other. And we know, like in the case of, and this would be true in cows too, if they're overconditioned, obesity was like the number one risk factor. Okay, and so because guess what, when fat is active, when they're laying it down, that results in an inflammatory response, and we never thought about that before. So
Let's step back. I'm curious to talk a little bit more about this idea of nutraceuticals, and choosing them effectively, right? Because I think there's a tendency to kind of either fall on one end or the other on that spectrum, like, oh, they're all fruit for dust, oh, that's not doing anything, or to kind of pile it on. And at a certain point, you pile in enough additives, you're not going to have the same ROI on the last one as you do on the first one.
right.
So when you're kind of, especially when it comes to this idea of gut health, what, how do you think through that when you're working with producers on what additives or nutraceuticals, whatever you want to call them, are going to be effective and worth the return on investment?
Really good question, because our biggest downside, unfortunately, is I can't show you. Okay, here's the test that I can do in the animal to tell me that this is going for what I'm after. I would contend that in most cases, the first thing, when we talk about nutraceuticals, are just that concept in terms of is that we have our micromanagement, or our mineral management where we want it. So things like zinc, copper, and selenium really are play into that. I mean, they're really good. And then, and then I look at things that probably, I mean, so certainly as you look at, I think certainly the products that use cell wall products. I think that again, because we're understanding that the bioactives in many of those products seem to be particularly anti-inflammatory. So as I'm looking
Hmm.
at, introducing, so if I'm starting cattle, or if I'm looking at transition diets, where I'm trying to increase intakes, I think you look at some of those type of products, because they seem to be able to do that. And I think then you have to look at sort of, kind of case by case, in terms of whether a particular type of product, in terms of whether it's a volatile oil or other things, makes sense in terms of what you can do. But the problem again has been, a lot of these things have been, and I've been involved. I can show you two papers. One paper we did statistically significant. We could show that there's a weight gain. And next time we did nothing. Okay.
Mm.
And it really gets back to, kind of what the environmental conditions. So and then this is always my, favorite line. I think we should use them when cattle are under stress. And then the question is, so what is stress? And then the second question is, when are they not under stress?
Right.
So I think, so yeah, so it's, to me, that it's a hard, it's, like I said, I think some of the, of the products that basically have, cell wall, and the thing is that, unfortunately, there's different kinds of glucans and other things that fall into that category. But those seem to, if I look at sort of from a standpoint of, really causing the immune system to be less reactive, which is what I want in the gut. I think that there's some utility for those, and but like I said, as you look at adding them, and I think the only way unfortunately, what I have seen on the good side is, companies uh, looking at multiple products. Okay, in other words, doing studies and doing that kind of peer reviewed research to look and say, oh yeah, this is what we're seeing. But unfortunately, the readout still gets back to productivity. Unfortunately, it's not like I can't say, well, okay, if I have less acute phase proteins or if I have less of this, we just don't have good markers that way, and that's really hindered us from being able to be, what I'm going to say, prescriptive about using nutraceuticals, because again, we don't have some good markers that tell us, okay, yeah, well, if I'm doing that, I'm getting the effect that I'm after, other than in the end. So how much of the milk's in the bucket? What's the, do I have less liver abscesses? Do I have less, whatever the end phenotype is? But that's been the limitation we've had, because we just don't have tests that are robust or cheap. Okay. And I don't mean cheap in other than the sense that you can do enough of them to really give you the answer that you're after, in repeatability. So
Yeah.
it's a tough one. It's a tough one about how to, figure out, the right thing at the right time. And, but I do feel that we're seeing more data than we've ever have. So that's good.
Yeah. What is one thing you wish people knew or understood better about the importance of gut health?
I think the idea that anything, okay, where I'm going to generate inflammation in any other part of the body, to so to speak, is going to, and vice versa, is going to really adversely affect how that gut's going to behave. Because the idea that, I think we've always thought about leaky guts always, well, it's a bad diet, or it's it's something, it's a virus or a bacteria that's on, it's causing hemorrhagic bowel or whatever. And I would contend that probably 9 times out of 10 is exactly the opposite. It's an animal with mastitis. It's an animal with metritis. It's an animal with a respiratory tract disease. If there's something else that's going on, and that really lends itself to now that gut health is affected. And I think people maybe might realize that better now, even like with COVID. Like all of a sudden, they had GI upsets and they had COVID. How'd that happen? Well, that's that to me. And so it just tells you how essential gut health is. So again, trying to minimize the number of things that and again, there's the reality of labor, there's the reality of, what the facilities are going to allow you to do. But the idea of not trying to stack too many things on them at a time, it gets back to your whole point about management, and the whole thing, and the issues of water and water intake they're a big issue. And, and so that to me is another issue that where you got to make sure, if you don't have the basics covered, it doesn't matter what other things that we can add that we think might help. If we don't have the basics covered, we're in trouble. And that would also goes to minerals as well.
All right. Well, we've been chatting for almost our full time. But before we move on to our 3 questions that we ask all of our guests, I'm going to ask you 2 things. The first one is, did we leave anything out? Is there any other points you want to drive home before we let our listeners go?
The big take home I would just say is that of the ruminant is not the spleen. It is the intestinal tract of that animal. So whatever we can do to keep it happy, we'll keep that cow or that calf happy.
The second question I'll ask before we get to the 3 other questions is, if people want to find more information, I know you're emeritus now, but if people want to find more information,
soon to be.
Yeah, soon to be. Sorry, don't want to jinx it. But if people want to find more information about what you're up to, what you're thinking about, things that you're working on, is there anywhere that they can find you or follow you?
Well, probably, LinkedIn is probably the best place to get a hold of me. I put a few things out there. And I'm not a super social media guy, and certainly they can contact me. I'm always glad to answer an email. In fact, the other day I got a handwritten letter asking me about a gut health thing. It's something that actually that I did in Iowa 2 years ago, and said, "Hey, I just wanted to ask you this," and so
all right,
I haven't seen one of those in a long time. But yeah,
that's special. Yeah,
yeah.
It's time for our famous 3. Introducing Ultrasorb R3.0, Volac's comprehensive and complete solution to reduce the negative impact of naturally occurring toxins on ruminants. Ultrasorb R3.0 is a species-specific product designed to mitigate the effects of specific mycotoxins in the gastrointestinal tract of ruminants. Ultrasorb R3.0 also offers lipopolysaccharides binding capabilities. Endotoxins such as LPS can contribute to inflammation in ruminants, with energy partitioned to mount an immune response instead of production. Learn more about Ultrasorb R3.0 at volac.com.
All right. And with that, we will go ahead and move into the 3 questions that all of our guests get asked. So the first one, you know these already, but the first one is, what is your favorite dairy-related book or resource?
Well, I'm going to be really jaded in this. Okay,
Oh.
yeah, because myself, Barry Bradford, the late Lorraine Sordello. I don't know if you know Lorraine.
Mhm.
So we and Amelia Williams at Mississippi State. We were all involved in a book which has the name of bovine immunology on it, but it has a great section on mastitis. And it was really written for dairy. Let me see if I don't have a copy right in front of me. But anyway, the beauty of it is it's actually online and it's
Uh-huh.
free. Okay.
Oh.
And so if you Google HIPRA, HIPRA, it's a Spanish vaccine company, and they wanted to provide a free resource. And bovine immunology, it's a 10-chapter book. In fact, the last chapter is on what's the ROI in vaccination. Really, it's really about the economics of vaccination.
Oh,
So
perfect.
it has a great chapter on mastitis and great things on transition. Barry Bradford did an awesome job in the transition, and as you can probably imagine, Lorraine wrote about oxidative
Mm.
stress. So it was to me, it was, and we designed it with lots of pictures. So it would be I think a resource that most, and we wrote it for the practicing veterinarian, but certainly also for, I think a dairyman would find it useful as well.
So what is your favorite non-dairy related book or resource?
There, we're into.
You have to read things besides dairy sometimes. Yeah.
I do. In fact, I'm reading some of John Grisham right now. But I would honestly say that probably the book that I enjoy the most, that I've read and reread, is a book called it's the Prodigal Son, or the Return of the Prodigal Son,
Okay.
by Henry Novant, who was
Ah.
a Catholic priest, but he was the first guy to sort of put theology and mental health together. Really interesting.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that's a new one.
Yep.
All right. So the last one is going to be, what do you think sets successful dairy professionals apart from the unsuccessful?
The people that I have seen that I think are the most successful do the little things right.
Mm.
They keep it simple, and I think that as I've looked over time. I mean, the things that you sort of on the management side, and one of my favorite slides is to show a vaccine bottle, and on the outside of the bottle it says management, and you cannot
Mm.
put that in. So I think the producers that do the little things right, and that begins with how they take care of their calves. So they do, colostrum, but they just get the basics right, and water quality, worker safety, but just there's just a myriad of little things. They don't get, they're not all that concerned about having some huge vaccination schedule or some elaborate diet or a lot of other things. They just do the simple things right.
Mm.
And then that's what they train their people to do. And I think that's just, because it's as simple as getting an animal fed and grown,
Yeah.
as far as it goes. I mean, it goes from there. I mean, everything you can do to reduce stress, but those things, if you keep it simple, I think that really makes a difference.
Well said. Very good. That sounds like a fantastic note to end on.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been great chatting with you, and wishing you all the best on your new job title, your emeritus title.
All right. Thank you very much.